Well, Dr. Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you.
We live in a beautiful country. I think we can both say that without any reserve whatsoever. It's one of my, you know, wonderful, great sensibilities about being a Canadian. It's gorgeous country, and I'm so lucky to have been from coast to coast several times. Um, Even with an open invitation that I never picked up on to go to Churchill, Manitoba. And I just said, sorry, I'm too busy. I think I was more afraid of the cold than I was of anything else. But then I'm living in Toronto right now with snow up to my eyeballs, and I'm going, oh, okay, cold is cold. So you and your wife just crossed the country by train, one of the items on my bucket list. So I think, given what's happening in the world right now, let's talk about something beautiful. That
Yes.
is Canada.
And and I've been to many parts of this country as you have at different times, but when you see them in isolation. The beauty of the Rockies, the beauty of the prairies,
Yeah.
the beauty of the Canadian Shield, the East Coast, whatever it may be. We've all seen them and you go to a place and you're immersed in the natural beauty of that place and the people and the culture and how, society adapts to living either in mountains or in prairie life. Everybody has to live slightly differently based upon the environment. The difference of the Canadian, which is the name of the train via that goes from Toronto to Vancouver, is train number one, and Vancouver to Toronto is called train number two on the route. They're 4 days and 4 nights. What the brilliance of that is you get to see all but the East Coast. And they have a run called the Ocean that goes from Montreal to Halifax. But you get to see the country in a continuous fashion as it rolls by your eyes. So you start off in Toronto, 20 minutes later, you're north, you're out of the building, shall we say, out of the urbanization. And you get to Northern Ontario, and you spend a
Yeah.
day and a half crossing Northern Ontario, seeing
Oh, yeah.
the Canadian Shield and the lakes and the rocks and everything like that. And then, the second day, you're arriving into Winnipeg in the evening. And Winterpeg in February, I went out
Oh,
for a stroll.
yeah.
Holy smokes. Yup, it lives up to its name. I tried to go for a walk to find a pharmacy for a different reason, and I turned around 5 minutes later and said, "I'll survive.
Yeah.
I can't do this." The air was so cold, but the beauty of it is, and then you roll into the prairies
Mhm.
and you go across the prairies and you see different communities, and you go into Saskatoon and a number of different towns along the way. You probably hit 45 individual towns where the train stops.
Wow.
And that's a beautiful thing about it. It truly
Yeah.
does connect
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
And there are 40 plus stops. And the Canadian is one of the few trains left where you can actually book a stop.
Yeah.
You can say, hey, I'm a canoeist, I'm a paddler. I want to get dropped off at this geolocation position. And you can book, it costs money, and the train will stop, open the baggage car, throw your, you know, take your canoe out and leave you on the side of the rails and wish you the best of luck. But you get to see the country through the prairies and then roll into Jasper around noon, get a couple of hours in Jasper to have a look around, and then travel through the mountains down the whole,
Mhm.
because it takes the northern route. It goes up
Yeah. Yeah.
to Edmonton,
Yeah.
through Jasper, and then
Yeah.
down into Kamloops, and you follow the Fraser River all the way down through Abbotsford
Yeah.
into Vancouver, and just looking at the Fraser River, and it is a fairly steep set
Yeah.
of walls, and they carved a set of tracks on either side, like
Yeah.
right out of the rock.
Yeah.
And we think about the challenges this country has right now, but we think about the brilliant things that we've done in the past. But it's the beauty of the country going by your eyes at a very slow pace. You're not in, it's not like I go to some place I got to visit, here are the top five tourist destinations when I'm in Ottawa. I'm here for a day. I got to run around and see them.
Mhm.
It's rolling by in front of you.
Yeah.
Set aside the incredible food that you get on the train. and all the other benefits set. And we can talk about that if you want to, but
Yes.
just the sitting there, you have two appointments a day. One is your lunch and one is your supper timing. Your breakfast is on demand as you wish. The rest of the 24 hours is yours.
Mm,
Absolutely yours. You
mm,
can, there are social activities. They run a bunch of programs. There's movies. There are cars on the train with this, with the dome that you can get together and have a drink and have conversation or whatever. Or you can just peel yourself away to a quiet place on the train and stare out the window as the country goes by. It is an incredible collection of people from all across because when you eat your supper and your lunch and supper, or dinner and supper, depending on where you are in this country, um, you will be sat with somebody different every meal. Because so
mm,
my wife and I are two people, and they're four chairs to a table, and
mm,
so there were three meal seatings. There was 120 people to be fed on the train,
mhm,
and so you had three lunches and three suppers, and you would sat with a different person each time, and their staff worked that.
mm,
They knew who you sat with at lunch, so this is how we're going to position you at supper. So you get to by habit, just by being there, meeting people and everything from there were two young ladies who were here on a 1 year visitor's permit from Taiwan
mm,
to a couple that just retired in their family home on Lake Rousseau,
mm,
right? So you have a certain cross section of the socioeconomic spectrum
mhm.
that are there, and it's just a brilliant way to see an absolutely majestic country. And it just reminds you of how big the freaking place is because it
Yeah,
takes you 5 days
yeah,
and four
yeah,
nights to cross
yeah,
3/4 of it.
yeah, yeah,
Throw on another 2 days to get out to the East Coast.
yeah,
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 it's a magical experience. It was on my bucket list.
yeah.
Um, and everybody that I met on the train were either on their second or third.
Wow.
One individual had done it 8 times,
Mm,
and my wife and I are like, yeah, yeah, definitely again. Maybe a shorter piece,
yeah,
go take the Winnipeg to Vancouver or Vancouver to Winnipeg.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, it's just if it's on anybody's bucket list, it's something you need to do. You really do.
I've traveled around the world. I've been in every continent except Antarctica and the Arctic. Um, and when I go to certain places, like China, for example, I'm blown away by what I call the order of magnitude. It's the historic monuments in China just blow you away. I mean, the Forbidden City is just in downtown or in the core of Beijing is phenomenal. Just by dint of its size, the thickness of the walls, of which there are two walls that encircle the actual original city, the imperial staircase that sometimes we see in movies, where the
Yeah.
emperor is all the way at the. It is actually that stunning. It
Yeah.
is not a fake. All right. So the order of magnitude just stands out. The Great Wall, the whatever you name it. I've been there. The Xi'an in Xi'an, the terracotta warriors. You walk into this really ugly archaeology site, right? That's a Quonset hut, and there's a word that you and I know that most people don't even know what
Yeah.
the heck that is.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
a Quonset hut. You're walking up, and you come to this glass wall, and these warriors are staring back at you because some of them are 7 feet tall. All right, you go, okay, order of magnitude blows you away.
Yeah.
Then I think of Canada. When I go, the order of magnitude is the land as well as the people, but the land,
The land, the
right?
sheer size of it. Yeah.
You talked about, you leave the citified part of, you're leaving Toronto, you go up into Ontario. most of us who live in the south of Canada, which is where the border with the United States is, have no idea how massive Ontario is.
Oh, I know.
It's huge. And most of us have no idea how long it takes to get out of Ontario going either east or west. You're just going, why? Never mind north. That's a whole other thing. Uh, and of all the provinces that we live in the city, but if you go up to places, Sioux Lookout, what the heck is that? Well, it's in a part of Ontario that is not primitive, but certainly not Toronto or Ottawa or London or Windsor.
Nope. We
It's
stopped in Sioux Lookout too. Yep.
How did you?
Yep.
What
Absolutely.
what did you think of Sioux Lookout? Let's talk about different places.
So Sioux Lookout is very much I don't want redneck. Best way to describe it. So it
Okay.
is a very much purpose-built
Hmm.
community
Hmm.
that is the regional center to support the activities that happen in that area. So
Hmm.
our current Canadian urbanism has a lot of fluff, a lot of extra stuff that's just nice to have and it's cool to look at. Everything in Sioux Lookout is purposeful. It's meant to be there. It serves a role,
Hmm.
etc. Like you don't have 6,000 square feet mansions. The
Hmm.
houses are appropriately built to be heated with wood because
Oh,
it's
that's what you do.
freaking cold for 8 months of the year, right?
Yes.
Like the 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 roads are built wide enough so that when you plow them with snow, they're still wide enough to drive on. We
Yes.
don't do that in Toronto. We don't
No.
do that in
No.
Ottawa,
No.
right?
No. No.
They think about the place is built for the environment in which it exists, and
Right.
so it functions exceptionally well. There's not a lot of pizzazz. The people there are fabulous. They're wonderful. Open the door for you in a heartbeat, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they don't worry about whether their local museum is having some programming this weekend
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're purpose driven communities, which means they're very resilient.
Yeah.
Very, very resilient. So I mean that was a prime example. We didn't stop there long because unfortunately Via was behind on their timing.
Mhm.
But that's the nature of the fact that we've made the decision that the tracks are privately owned in Canada. So and Via is on there because of an edict of the Canadian government.
Right.
If you
Right.
ask the railway companies, they would kick Via off the tracks
Oh yeah.
permanently
Oh yeah. That's
in a
I've
heartbeat.
run into that. Yes, I
Yeah,
run into that problem.
yeah.
Talking to the more commercial oriented rail systems, where Via is a poor, quote unquote, poor, well, in a family of three, it's number four, actually. It's that little runt that we don't want to deal with, except
And
that
your mother says you have to play with them.
exactly. It's even worse,
Oh yeah,
yeah, don't beat up your kid, brother, kind of thing.
let them tag along.
Yeah, yeah, yes. But as you describe Sue, the Sioux Lookout, I'm thinking of the word preparedness.
Yeah.
Resilience, brilliant word for people who actually have to accommodate where they live. When you plow snow so that everybody could be mobile in some way, shape, or form, whether it's because you need to eat or you need to move things, from an industry point of view,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
lumber or otherwise, you realize that the roads have to be wider than what you would have in a city,
Mhm.
right? And you would have to plow the width, not to create banks on the sides that prevent people from driving. Right here in the
Yeah.
city right now in Toronto, and I'm sure Ottawa's got similar situation. I know Montreal, the postings on Instagram are an absolute hoot.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
forget about parking. You can't drive down the street because of the mountains of snow on each side,
Yeah.
right? And so accommodation, resilience, preparedness. This is all part of the plan. This isn't something that
No.
they think about like, oh, we got a snowstorm. We live in an area where there is going to be snow. It's going to accumulate. It's going to be of a certain depth. And I don't care what the weather station says, the weather report is, it's reality.
Yeah.
But, so it takes forever in some senses, even by train, especially by train, to leave Ontario, and you're going west.
2 days. It took
And,
2 days to get out of Ontario.
2 days to get out of Ontario. I hope everybody listening realizes what that means. And it
Yeah.
isn't because you're sitting around by a campfire waiting for, the next train. You're in the moving vehicle, right?
Oh
That,
yeah. I mean, for the most part, the train is chucking along, right?
yeah,
It's doing its thing, and it only stops probably 6 or 7 times for mandatory stops for refueling, draining of
yeah,
the black
yeah,
tanks, that kind of
yeah,
thing. But
yeah.
um, most of the time, it's consistently moving, and when it does stop, it stops, picks up a couple passengers, discharges them, and they're gone in a heartbeat.
Right.
Periodic, we had to stop once coming out of Jasper because somebody missed
Oh,
the timing.
ooh,
And so the train leaves when the train leaves. The train
right.
doesn't count passengers. They have no idea whether you've gotten off, and they have no idea whether you've gotten back on. That is
Right.
100% up to you. When they tell you right up front, we're staying for exactly 1 hour, for exactly 2 hours.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and then if you don't get back on the train, that's not their problem.
yeah.
And so one person unfortunately pushed it a little too far, and so we
Uh,
stopped about 10 minutes down the track and waited for a few minutes, and some beat up old Via pickup truck came bombing up a side road and dropped off the individual.
But listen, it not only are we talking about preparedness, and
Yep.
that's a general topic that we usually talk about, and we talk about accommodating the reality around you. We're also talking about responsibility. I mean, you can't, separate that word or that reality from the reality we're talking about. So you go from there and you cut across, you're crossing the border, as it were. Now you're in Manitoba, and you're coming in through, I don't know if you went through Selkirk or places like that, and then ended up in Winnipeg or what?
Yeah, it comes down because it goes through Sioux Lookout, so it doesn't quite follow the north of Lake Superior. It stays fairly north
Okay.
when you come down through. When you hit Winnipeg late in the evening, so 7 to 9 o'clock at night, depending on the train schedule, is usually when you roll in on day two
Mhm.
into Winnipeg, and that's their crew change. Very interesting. Via does this crew change there. So the crews work 4 days on, 9 days off. But when
Okay.
they're on, they work from 6:30 in the morning till 11 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's their work day.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And they have one attendant per car. And
Okay.
this is something VIA learned because of emergency management. And one of their individuals was giving us a presentation on Rail 101, lessons from the railroad. And one of them was they used to sleep up in the baggage car. Now the baggage car is heated, and they used to have bunks up in the baggage car. So it was where the VIA Rail employees slept. And then they had a derailment, and there was no VIA personnel able to get to assist the passengers because they were all up in the baggage car. So they changed the rules now. And so each sleeping car has 20 beds. One of those beds will be taken up by a VIA employee that spends
Yeah.
the entire time in your car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're the ones that put your beds down at night, put them
Yeah.
up in the
Yeah.
morning,
Yeah.
and do various things. But the attendant is there to help you and serve you. But they're standing there smiling at you at 6:30 in the morning, all dressed and ready to go,
Yeah.
and they're available until 11 o'clock at night. And so
Yeah.
the crew that works Toronto to Winnipeg turns around and jumps on the train that's coming from the west and takes
Oh,
that train back to Toronto.
okay.
Or the train from the west, they go 2 days from Winnipeg to Toronto, jump on the train from Toronto to Winnipeg, and then they're off. But Winnipeg and the two corners, two ends are where they change over. So you got a crew and you get to know them for the first 2 days, and they're wonderful people.
Yeah.
Obviously, we met one individual who was there 23 years on the train,
Wow.
and that's his job. He crosses
Wow.
Canada by the train, and that's what he does. And he was incredible, helpful, brilliant. All of them are fully bilingual, and so you just got top-notch service from people who wanted to be there,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
that's the difference. I mean, you can go to a restaurant and get great service,
Yes.
but there's a difference from somebody who truly wants to be
Yes.
there and
Yes.
enjoys what they do for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. I got into a discussion with a friend, a young friend of mine, who actually is the son of the family that owns the restaurant that I go to quite regularly. Italian background. And we got into this discussion of the difference between, say, a European approach to service and a North American approach to service, or the lack of service here in North America, especially when it comes to food.
Oh,
Right? The
yeah.
European approach is, if you're a waiter, you probably have done this for generations. You're part of a family that has been part of this establishment for generations, and it's an honored profession,
Yeah.
and you act accordingly. Sometimes acting accordingly is to dismiss your customers because they're a bunch of jackasses, but that's different. There is this pride. Whereas here, I work as a waiter in order to make money, in order to do other things, rather than considering it a profession. On occasion, you do run into people, and I have in the past, run into people who consider their career and their profession to be service industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're so unusual, especially from a North American career-oriented perspective, that you just go, wow, that's amazing. It stands out. Uh, Quick story, because I do want to get back to Winnipeg, which, by the way, happens to be one of my favorite cities. And that's where you and I are probably going to have a little headbutt. But moving right along, it's I was a member of the University Club of Toronto for many, many years, and got to know the wait staff there, the bartender there, and whoever. And not that I went there often. It's just that when I went there, it was always a pleasure to be there on my part.
Yeah.
So there's a level of respect for the people who were taking care of me. And they got to know me, and it was always, oh, we missed you. We haven't seen you in, X number of weeks or whatever. And there was this level of respect that was mutual between them and me, where some people would consider them servants. I consider
Yeah.
them people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're people, and they're making my life comfortable, right? Because that's what they want to do. Why would I stop them?
Well, exactly. And one prime example is when you're in sleeper class and you register in Toronto and there's one table at the back of the business lounge, and I know you've been in the Via Business Lounge, but in the back business lounge, there's a table where you go to book your first meal timing. The
Yes.
the person who's booking that for you is actually one of the waiters from the
Yes.
train.
Yes. Yes.
The second night, my wife wasn't feeling very well.
Ah.
I showed up for dinner and she called my wife by name and
Mm.
said, "Is she not coming?" "No, she's not feeling well." "Is there anything I can get for you?" And when somebody says, "Is there anything I can get for you?" you can tell whether that's line three in their what they're told in their
Yes.
training, or
Yes.
whether somebody pauses for a second and shows empathy and says, "Oh,
Yes. Yes.
is there anything
Yes.
I can do to make your wife feel better?"
Yes.
And I felt that right away. And I was
Yeah.
like, number one, you've got 120 people eating, and you just called my wife by the first name within a handful of hours and, one day of us being here.
Yeah.
So kudos to you. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, well done. Uh, and two, the fact you showed empathy, I'm like, you come across this, and I say this often, you come across people periodically who are definitely in the correct profession.
Mhm.
It's whether they were divinely created or whatever created for this one specific role in life, and
Yes.
they fill it and fit it perfectly.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
like, wow. It's
Yeah.
like in university. I met professors that, wow,
Yes.
you shouldn't be here,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Oh
You know,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
and 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 I used to joke about this in the military. They would say, well, as soon as you got a qualification, you're then qualified to teach that course. I'm
Mm.
like,
No,
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 no, not at
no,
all.
no, no,
No, no, not at
no,
all. And there are
no.
some people, for example, and this is a bit of a side, we had one professor who taught macroeconomics.
Oh,
He hadn't published a paper in about 30 years, but there
uh-huh.
was no single human being I've ever met who could more clearly
Ah,
explain
there you go.
macroeconomics
Yeah,
to first and second year
yeah, yeah,
students who
yes.
were probably taking it as an elective.
And had to in order to graduate.
And so I just listened to the man. I'm like, I've been studying in economics for 35 years of my adult life, and you just packaged it up in
Yep.
3 hours.
You know, when you run into or meet or even listen to people like that, you stop and you go, oh, I could never, ever be as good or
Oh
as
yeah.
great
You're
as
just in
they
awe.
are.
In awe.
You just like, you're in awe. I agree, you're in awe. I remember a quick story, and then we go back to Winnipeg. When I was at Mac doing
Other thing.
whatever, putting my psychological head back together again, but that's beside the point. Um, no, it wasn't Mac, it was Toronto, University of Toronto. When I first arrived several years into being here, Jean Vanier, I don't know if you know who Jean Vanier was. Jean Vanier was the son of the Governor General of Canada way back, back in the 50s and 60s. And Jean Vanier would have been, he came to give a talk. He would have been in his 60s. So tall, elegant Frenchman with fingers that should have been playing a piano from 6 weeks, 6 miles away.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
those, dressed just, relaxed in a suit. And he's the founder of L'Arche. L'Arche
Oh yeah.
is a home for people who have developmental and mental disabilities. Brilliant, brilliant. And he was coming from France, where he founded it, to visit the various L'Arche locations in Ontario, but there is one big one in north of Toronto. But he came and he gave a talk. He was on stage. There were like 300 people in the audience at the University of Toronto. He was on stage. He sat on a stool. He had a microphone in his hand, and there was nothing but a light above him. And he spoke for 2.5 hours, totally mesmerizing everybody. You could
Yeah.
hear, nobody even coughed or sneezed during that 2.5 hours. He went, okay, there's power right there. You know,
To be able to hold a room.
hold the room. And to think that there's this lady, young lady, I'm going to say young lady, I'll be presumptuous here. This young lady who, is serving 100 and some odd people, and this is like the second day,
Yeah.
and knows people by name.
Yeah.
And you go,
Yeah.
whoa, okay, that's dedication, commitment. I like my job, is what that says to me.
Yeah. And I remember the one um before each service of the meal, the head waiter comes out and gives a little spiel about the meal and the idea behind it. And he said at the beginning of the first one, he goes, we understand this is a bucket list for many of you. So we're going to make it the best possible experience we can.
Okay,
So they
okay,
even were overtly saying that we understand that a lot of you have spent a lot of time saving money and getting the resources together to take the trip.
yeah,
And so while you're here,
yeah,
we are going to intentionally
yeah,
make this the best experience we can for you. So it
yeah,
is memorable.
yeah,
Yeah, that's just, and I mean,
yeah.
you know,
Eh,
Winnipeg didn't do that for me though. I'll be right blunt. No, Winnipeg did it.
Winnipeg,
Too damn.
why are you jumping into the bad end of the pool when it comes to Winnipeg? You stayed on the train, I'm assuming, when you slept, you even in the city, you stayed on the train?
Oh yeah. Well, no, I popped out in Winnipeg. I went to the market at the Forks. I don't know
Oh,
if you ever been there.
oh, many times.
Yeah. So that's right next to the train station. So it's
Yes,
a
it is.
short hop.
Yes, it is.
Great place to look around, etc. But
Yeah.
for the vast majority of stops throughout this trip, other than Winnipeg and Jasper, we stayed on the train.
Okay.
Um, just you know, if you stop in Sioux Lookout at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's minus 37.
No,
Like,
no,
why?
no,
Why?
you don't. No,
Why?
no.
There were the walkers among the group who got out
Yeah,
and walked up and down the
yeah.
length of the. Okay, fine. I can walk the train on the inside and get exercise, but you do you. Off you go. You have a great time.
But this was February, and you were in Winnipeg,
Yeah.
and it was night. And you, well, at
Yeah.
late afternoon, you ventured out into the Forks, which
And
is,
it was even. Yeah. We
walking
got.
under the rain. Yeah, I know where it
Oh
is.
yeah.
Been there many times.
Yeah. And so we went down and out and spent a little bit of time in there and all the different restaurants and shops and
Yeah, yeah.
bought some really incredibly tasty, well overpriced local snackies. But it is what you know where it Winnipeg, downtown Winnipeg, is not really a tourist destination.
No, it isn't.
It is
No,
not built for that.
no, it
There's
isn't.
you don't go on a walkabout in downtown
No.
Winnipeg in February.
Well, I do, but that's
Well,
because I'm crazy. Yes.
okay. Well, I don't, right? It's not like downtown Montreal, downtown
No,
Quebec
no,
City,
no, 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 no,
downtown
no, no,
Toronto, downtown Ottawa,
no,
downtown
no.
Halifax. They're all beautiful places to
Yeah,
be,
yeah, I
not
agree.
downtown Winnipeg. So, yeah, no, it was great to be there, but yeah, it was brutally cold. I was outside for as little time as necessary, but the nature of the train is you don't have to get off.
No, you don't. That's the point. But two or three things that I'm not going to counter you because Winnipeg is a difficult city. It truly, truly is challenging. It's probably one of the reasons why I like it is because it is challenging. Summer, winter, whatever the weather is, whatever the
Yeah,
season is, Winnipeg is challenging. And you're right, it is not a tourist destination unless you have a very specific place you want to go to.
yeah,
Right. If you want to go to the Winnipeg Art Gallery, which is not a huge, massive, it's not the National Gallery, it's worth. But you don't go all the way to Winnipeg to go to the art gallery.
no,
You don't go to Winnipeg to go to the the confluence of the Red and the Assiniboine. That's the Forks. That's not the reason to be there. Uh, but I do have to ask a question. Do you happen to remember what the temperature was?
yeah, it was only about minus 18.
Oh, that's balmy.
Oh, I
That's
know, I
oh,
know.
you got to be kidding. What are you, a wuss, a wimp? Well, give
It
me a
was a little,
break.
there was a wind chill.
Yeah, okay, here we go. Wind chill. I've been in Winnipeg, and I fully understand. As soon as you described it at one point, that you could feel it
Yeah,
never mind your face or your head or your ears. I mean, I first time I walked out at minus 30 from the hotel, and it was minus 30. It was
yeah.
January. And I think I may have mentioned this before, but it was that burning sensation in my lungs,
Oh yeah,
in
yeah,
my chest. You
yeah,
got that. Yeah, because the vapor in your lungs is freezing, actually. It's crystallizing. That's what that
yeah,
burning sensation is.
yeah. And you step out of a very warm
Oh, totally.
train,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you step outside. But it's interesting because in the train you have to go between the train cars, and that's
Mm,
not insulated,
no,
and it's
no.
usually covered in snow the whole time across Canada.
Oh, interesting.
They try to clean it up a bit, but there's snow in there. So,
No.
and navigating around rail cars is somewhat challenging with
Yeah.
people moving, shall we say? The hallways are, how do I say this? The hallways are small
Yes.
and not everybody is. So you get an interesting turn. You learn quickly which corners you can back up in to let people by. And, by day 3, we all know the dance.
Yes.
You see coming and you immediately realize
Yes.
who's closer to a corner. So am I going to back up? Are they going to
Yep.
back
Yep.
up?
Yep.
You figure all that out and you work
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
but you have to walk. So periodically get a blast of cold air when you're going to between cars. But yeah, no, it's a cold region. It definitely is. But I know Winnipeg has a lot to see. It's just if you're there and off a train for 2 hours, you go to the Forks. There's nothing else,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
No,
That's it.
especially
You
the
got nothing else.
location where you are.
It's
That's
a
the
little,
closest
and
thing
it's
to
like
go.
when you stop in Edmonton, the new train station in Edmonton is way out outside of the city,
Yes.
right? So there's nothing
Yes.
there.
No, there's
Now,
nothing.
if you're a smoker, the fresh air breaks have a whole, as they call them, have a whole different meaning, right?
Yeah.
And at one point, somebody did get caught lighting up a dart in between the rail cars, thinking that they were safe. Um, but for people who smoke, and 1 in 5, 1 in 7 Canadian adults smokes or something like that. It's actually fairly high. But anyhow, they would get off and do their thing. But other than that, like why are you getting off in Edmonton in the side when it's way out in the middle of nowhere? You can't see
Yeah.
anything. You see the buildings highlighted
Yes.
off in the future of the
Yes.
downtown,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
outside the city
Yeah.
at a rail station. There's nothing there. There's not
Yeah.
even a convenience store if you want to buy some
No.
chippies or
No.
something.
No, no, yeah, that I know. But just the way you're describing it, and this is the reason why we're talking about this, is the greatness of Canada. And it's how wonderful it all is and what our culture is. And the way you just described, navigating, that's a different word for a rail, but it is navigating the narrow corridor of a train car, and recognizing that you're in a community of people who are not your community. These are all strangers, right? Recognizing that there eventually what occurs is a rail culture around people, when to navigate, how to navigate, when to step aside, how to step aside, when not to go rambling down, the corridor, recognizing someone's rambling up the corridor and going, okay, it's that politeness expectation.
Yeah.
And we think it's polite only, but we fail to realize, if we don't understand what politeness is all about, it's also survival mechanism. Okay. If you got a 5 foot wide person coming the other way, now that is obviously a somewhat of an exaggeration, not totally, but a 5 foot wide person coming at you and you aren't 5 feet and there's no way you're going to navigate a narrow corridor, you have to make a decision here, because the 5 footer can't make a decision. There's no place for them to go.
Yeah.
They're occupying the space, full stop. Right. And so again, it gets us back to our ongoing theme of preparedness. All right.
Yep.
You have to make a decision as to what you are going to do in this particular instance.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes, you can be the 3-year-old, and you can see it. 3-year-olds will go zooming out there.
Yeah.
Period. Full
Just
stop, because they don't have this sense of context.
yeah. Yeah.
They haven't learned yet that you can't just do this. All right. But Winnipeg, yeah. By the way, you were next to one of my second favorite Western hotels. Well, no, second favorite, because my third favorite is the Best Borough in Saskatoon. But second favorite is the Fort Garry.
Okay.
So if you looked out, you could
Yeah.
see this massive railway hotel,
Yep.
and you were within walking distance. It's about 2 blocks from where you were, 2 or 3 blocks, and it's one of my second favorite hotels. My favorite is the one you were nowhere near, and that's the McDonald in downtown Edmonton. You
No,
couldn't
yeah,
even,
we
you
didn't even.
couldn't even see it from where you were.
No. It's the rail stays outside of Edmonton. So there's really, when you're crossing the prairies, it's a lot of the same, but it's really interesting how there's a whole bunch of really small communities,
Yes,
not a few larger ones, but an incredible Saskatchewan still remains a very, very rural province.
totally.
It doesn't have the 85, 15% urban to rural that a lot
No,
of Canadian provinces does.
no.
And you'll come up with this little town that has maybe 25 homes, a couple services buildings,
Mm,
and one big object next to the rail,
yes,
the grain elevator,
yes, yes, yes.
right? And they look different. Some of the old wooden ones, some of the
Uh,
modern metal ones, but you can clearly see that
mm,
this is the service hub for the local farm community.
yes,
And this is the grain elevator where the
yeah,
local farm community
yeah,
sells their grain and gets it stored locally
yeah.
before it's loaded onto the train. And it's really neat because it's that
Mhm.
repeated multiple times.
Yeah,
It's not like there's one large center and everybody feeds to it.
no,
Every little tiny region
yep,
has its own small little service center.
yep, yeah. And one of the again remarkable things that I love about Canada is not only the uniqueness of each area and the fact that it is small and huge at the same time. There's the counterpoint. You've got this vast prairie in Saskatchewan that is so flat you cannot see the end of the day. Right. Yet at
Yep.
the same time, you've got a grain elevator. And you know
Yeah,
what? The architecture of those grain silos is so unique.
yes. Yes. Craftsmen,
Totally,
local craftsmen,
totally,
right?
totally.
When you go to some of the old ones that are still in use that are wooden
Yeah.
and where you can just say, you know what? That was built by the local farmers by hand
Yep.
in a community resilient effort to have a
Yep.
collective place to
Yep.
sell and transport the grain that
Right.
feeds their family
Yep.
and feeds the community.
Yes.
From an economic perspective, feeds the community, not
Exactly.
literally.
Exactly. Exactly.
But you could see that it's the prime example of my argument for community resilience is that grain elevator was not built by an outside company.
No.
But when you go across the line, you start to see the ones that are and the transformation. This is
Yes.
this one is clearly an industrial corporate owned grain elevator. This one is clearly not because some of the rural ones are serviced by jury rigged pickup trucks that do
Yes, I
work.
know. I know.
You go to the next one and it has a whole bunch of industrial machinery that are
Yep.
not paid for through the proceeds from the local grain cells from the farmers. So you can see,
Hmm.
and sometimes and my wife even remarked, we go by somewhere and we're like, why? You
Yeah.
come across a hill and there's one house and there's
Yes.
nothing within 10
Nothing.
kilometers. You're like, why?
Yes.
Why are you here? Of course, you
Yes.
can't ask the question, but it's interesting where you look around. This is obviously the farmhouse for a quarter section. For those of you who understand farming,
Yeah.
you know, that's some 600 to 700 acres, I think, if I remember correctly, or
Right.
hectares.
Yeah.
There's nothing around but one house.
No.
And you're like, they're probably pretty resilient.
Yeah.
They don't
Especially,
they don't
yeah.
run out of a cup of sugar. Like
No, no, there are no neighbors to go borrow that cup of sugar from.
these hardy people
Yeah.
would not feel comfortable in downtown Toronto.
No, totally.
And that's the brilliance of part, not just the scenery of the
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
but you can see how so many different Canadians live so differently than
Yeah.
each other.
Wait,
It's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. One of my close friends or family that actually we just communicated recently because the senior member is not well, but their daughter living in Winnipeg, their daughter when she graduated or went to university, business, whatever, she she met and fell in love with a young man from Steinbeck, Manitoba.
Mm.
Now, a lot of people don't know what Steinbeck, Manitoba is. I've been there. Not a destination I would probably go back to. I think they still live there, and if they ever hear this, they probably want to kill me.
It's probably not the top of your list, eh?
Yeah, no, mom and dad live in Winnipeg, but daughter and husband and grandchildren live in Steinbeck. Mennonites. We're talking earthbound Mennonites. And so when they got married, these are people who tend to put on, what some people would call posing. We have to show everybody everything is wonderful, and we have money, and they do have money. But they had the wedding reception. The wedding took place in a Mennonite church in downtown Winnipeg, because that's where most of mom and dad's family were coming in from England or from Ottawa or from Montreal. And so nobody's going to go out to Steinbeck. And so it took place in a Mennonite church, and the wedding was performed, the ceremony was performed by an uncle who's a preacher. Okay, fine, all that stuff. So this is kind of homey stuff. Okay. Then you go to the reception, and it's in the ballroom at the Fort Garry. Right. Now, when I say dyed-in-the-wool, land-bound Mennonites, we're talking about people who do not dance, do not gamble, do not drink. They're all incredibly wealthy because they are all tied to the land, and they are beyond land managers. These are people who live in semi-communes without necessarily being Hutterites,
Yep.
which is communes. But you go in and you say, I'm thinking of the house on the little lump of a hill in the middle of the prairie.
Yeah.
And these are people who would show up in what I called their Sunday go to meet overalls and boots,
Yeah. The clean overalls,
the clean ones.
the dress ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these urbanites from Montreal and whatever, all dressed up, and the wedding party is all in tuxedos and everything. And there's a band, because there is going to be, dancing. And there is an open bar, because there is going to be alcohol. But one half of the room is all of these farmers sitting there looking at all of these sinners having a good time. And you say to yourself, we live in such a diversely beautiful country where we could actually be in the same place at the same time and not actually be the same people.
No, no. Yeah. And you saw that in the train personalities and the people on the train and what they were up to, what they were looking for, what they were talking about, what they were interested in discussing. I'm having dinner with a couple who um, live on Lake Rousseau.
No, okay. Oh yeah, that's wow.
So
Oh yeah,
that, that's
totally
just
different.
totally different. Totally different from my life experience.
Yep.
Wonderful people, great meal conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I sat and had lunch with two Taiwanese students,
Yeah.
right? And then I had a, lunch with one gentleman who was coming from Ottawa. I didn't know him. He was from Ottawa, and he was taking the train out, and he was spending about 5 or 6 days touring Vancouver, and then he was taking the train back.
Oh wow.
This was
Obviously
his winter
retired.
vacation.
Yeah,
No,
obviously. No?
no, it was his winter vacation.
Whoa.
Some people, like I went down to the Dominican Republic to get burned on a beach.
Yeah.
This was his gig. It's not his first time on the train. He loves it. Traveling by himself. He had a little cabin for one. And this was his thing. And he was taking the train out. He loved it. And he spent some time visiting friends and then take the train back.
Oh wow.
So you get the opportunity if you, again, that's the brilliance of the train. if you want to engage
Yes,
and have these conversations, then
yes,
the collision spaces and the opportunity exist. Should you
yeah,
decide that you want to be more introverted and just talk to those you have to because you're eating with them, and then other than that, hang out in your room, which some people did. I only ever saw them at mealtime.
yeah,
Then that's fantastic. You sit in a room, you got a 4 by 3 foot window
yeah.
in your room and a comfortable chair to move around and just sit there and stare. I mean, how can't you?
It says again something about not only our culture, but also about us as people, Canadians, where there is a level of friendliness, and we are known around the world to be friendly, though I do try to dispute that as often as possible when I'm overseas, to make sure people realize that not all of us are friendly. A one-man show to be obnoxious, and hardly. But it says something about us and the greatness of who we are and the pride that I have and I'm not a flag waving type of person, but I'm really proud to be Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud not to be somebody else or something else, and I am from somewhere else. Well,
And most of us are to some degree or another,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and it and I think the train has taught me that a lot can be done when you celebrate
yeah,
instead of apologizing.
yes,
Um, when we start to get back to the point of saying, you know what, this is a pretty freaking great country. We've got some amazing people, some amazing territory, amazing great things that we need to celebrate and champion. And there's nothing wrong, and there's nothing I have to apologize for in a good
no,
Canadian way for
no,
flying a flag on my front lawn,
yeah,
or putting
no,
a little flag on my car,
yeah,
or on my Twitter X bio.
yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think we would go far in this country to get back to that.
I agree. I agree. Especially in the current atmosphere, global atmosphere,
Yeah.
global situation. I not only agree, I agree not only that we have no need to apologize, we also have no need to be afraid unless we actually don't believe in ourselves. And
Yep.
that to me is more important. Um, we don't owe anyone anything, period. We are who we are.
Yep. Yep.
And we don't have to be apologetic about it.
Nope.
But we also have to recognize that we have capabilities and talent that we often underestimate. We don't recognize just how incredibly rich we are
Mm-hmm.
in terms of both land and opportunity and beauty and personality and all of the other things that go with it. Whoever wants to rattle a sword around us, at us, or whatever, okay. Um, what's going to make us be resilient in the face of such things is not countering with a rattling sword, but being exactly who we are.
Yeah. Or what we have the potential to be.
Well, I think we have a whole lot more potential, and I think there is a whole lot more potential that does exist. We just don't acknowledge it or recognize it. I go,
No, because it's the quintessential Canadian,
yeah, to understate and
to
bury it.
understate. And
Yeah, 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 yeah,
but we have a great opportunity that, through some interesting choices, I like to look at days in the current context as an opportunity.
yeah.
We
So do
have a
I.
chance to do something
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
We have a chance to do something wonderful. The
Yep.
choice is whether we are bold enough
Yes.
to accept the challenge that's before us and do some wonderful, great things. And now
Yeah.
I'm an eternal optimist. I think we will. I I
Oh,
I think we will do that. I just think it'll be a little bit longer ramp up than maybe the situation calls for.
and I agree with you, but I also have this sense, or in addition, I have this sense, not a but. In addition, I have this sense that that whatever that is, however we want to understand it, is going to be accomplished not by some grand or grandiose gesture or action, but by recognizing that you know the world of SMEs is basically who we are. I mean, we think small, medium enterprises. When we think about the grand whatevers, we have forests, we have oil, gas, and mineral reserves. We actually have some of the largest gold reserves in the world here in Canada. We have some of the largest diamond uh, reserves here in Canada, in
Yeah.
Ontario,
Oh
of
no,
all places.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ring of fire in Northern Ontario.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and yes, it almost difficult and almost impossible to navigate to get up there. Yeah, yeah, we all understand that. We all understand the difficulties. We live in a big country where things are difficult. You go to Winnipeg, you arrive at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's minus 18. And for me, that's balmy. For you, it's like, what the hell is this? And I say it's balmy because I actually was in Winnipeg when it was minus 46. So
Mhm.
let's move along. Okay. And that level of difference, I think, is our strength.
Yeah.
Fact that the prairies are flat and they're not forested and they're not mountains on the one side, they are not, oceans and the shields on the other side, they're not the forests in the north of Ontario. That actually is our strength.
Right, because they're not substitutes, they're complementary. And we have such a great potential in a intelligent and sustainable way to provide for a great social safety. And I take the words of the Manitoba Premier, Wab Kinew,
Hmm.
who I think has some pretty high
Yeah,
future in this country.
yeah, I agree.
Um, he was the one that said the we need to remember that the economic horse pulls the social cart,
Yeah,
and he's an NDP premier.
yeah, I
And
know.
his meant was we have great potential to
Yep,
to open the economic engine of Canada, to
yeah,
create massive economic processes and growth
yep,
so that we can do the righteous Canadian thing and
yes,
take care of each other and take care of society. But we
yes,
can't do that without a booming, robust industry.
yeah,
And we're blessed
yeah,
with the geography that provides us a booming natural resource
yep,
industry.
yep, yep.
We have got to stop trying to replace it with niche ideas,
That's right.
whether they're ideologically driven or not, and look at what we have
Yep,
and do it the right way.
yeah, yeah,
And in the end, then Canada becomes far less dependent on other systems
yeah,
and other nations
yeah,
and far more independent to choose its pathway forward.
exactly. It
We're not there right now.
No, no, no. And part of it is because we don't, part of it is whatever the ideological reasons are and whatever the geopolitical reasons are, fine. We can debate that
Yeah,
until the cows decide not to come home, but move
it's too cold.
along. Yeah, because, well, they have to come home, otherwise they freeze.
Oh yeah, they come home. That's no worry. They know where
Yeah,
the
they're
warm
they're
part
gonna
is.
come home, but let's let now as there's an aside that took the sidecar on that one, moving right along. Part of it is that we're enamored of the big picture economics. We have to do automobile, manufacturing here in Ontario. It's got to be oil and gas in Alberta. It's got to be lumber and wood in British Columbia and in Quebec for that matter. And so you're thinking big, 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 big. You need big trucks and you need big whatevers, and you need pipelines, you need all of this stuff. What we actually should do is go out and find out what happens elsewhere. I'll give the example. This is fascinating. Steinbeck, again, a place that I probably never want to go back to. Okay? Not because they're Mennonites. I think Mennonites are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
They don't, not fun in the way I like to have fun, but that's different. These are salt of the earth, down, they're 2 feet on the ground. There ain't no bull roar around them, although they may be, they may have bulls and all that stuff. But did you know, and most of us don't know this, I was shocked when I found out, they are the largest pork producers in the world. Comes out of Steinbeck.
Really? Didn't know.
You just go, what? You know what their biggest customer is? China.
Yeah.
And you go, okay. And who are these people? They're Mennonites. They're not some agribusiness.
Nope.
They control, not control, they are responsible for the entire process, from raising the frickin' prig all the way up to butchering it.
Vertically integrated.
Vertically integrated as part of their cultural, communitarian, religious foundation. Okay? And who do they export and sell to? Who do they sell to and export to? Communist China.
Economics. Do we care?
Sure. And
Do we care who buys our pork? Why would we care?
We're not interested in their values. We're not interested in
Nope.
their geopolitics. They are a market.
It's the same as when if it's LNG or if it's lumber, don't care.
Don't care.
Don't care. You're paying the world market rate for LNG.
Right.
Don't care.
That's right. And so we sit back and we think, oh, well, we need to get into the geopolitical arguments over whether it's going to be the East or the West who's going to be the hegemony of the world economics and the world leadership. And you go,
it's the same as India telling the world, who are you to tell me I can't buy Russian gas?
Exactly.
You're not in a position to dictate what my country and who they're going to buy from because you have a little scuffle you're worried about.
That's right.
And it was India that basically is telling that the world, we'll deal with China over here. We'll deal with Russia over here, the Americans over here, the South Africans. We have no problem whatsoever. Why would they? And I remember the foreign minister from India saying this on a stage, and his argument was, why wouldn't I buy cheap resource energy for my country? He said, it's great. Your sanctions have reduced the global price of Russian oil, which makes it far cheaper for my country to buy Russian oil. Why would I not do that?
It's called opportunity.
Yeah. Your sanctions just created a massive economic opportunity for my country, and we're going to seize it. And we don't need your permission to who we trade with and don't trade with.
No.
And I think if we look at it that perspective, do I care that it's the Venezuelans buying the lumber? I don't care. We're ethically and sustainably producing lumber. Now, no, we're not clear cutting, but this is the part we can hold our heads up high and say we are a natural resource nation that produces our resources ethically and sustainably in the safest, environmentally protected way, but we still produce them.
Yeah, that's right.
We still produce them. Like we're still drilling for oil, friends.
Exactly.
We're just doing it in the most sustainable way.
One of the things, and one of the things that, again, as a new Canadian, and I love saying that in front of a group of students nowadays, because they all look at me going, You're a new Canadian. I
What do you
said,
mean you're not old stock Canadian?
no. Well, and beside not, I mean, they just look at the color of my skin and they go, "What do you mean you're not a new? You're a new Canadian?"
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I'm a new Canadian. I came here from somewhere else, but it has upset me for 100 years that I've lived in this country, and that's not even an exaggeration. That we don't. We're highly intelligent. We're incredibly creative. We are people who have our 2 feet on the ground generally. We don't have our heads up places I can't mention too often. Depends on what field you're in. And so on and so forth. We are entrepreneurial, but not necessarily strong opportunists. We think too narrowly. And it always upsets me that, there's a world out there
Yeah.
and it ain't just North America.
We're very conservative by culture, but not conservative in the political sense, but we're very conservative by culture. We like to think about things. Maybe we'll change. We're going to consider it. We're going to ponder. We're going to look at options. Whereas other parts of the world are like, no, great. Something new's coming in, disruption, innovation. We're all about it. Love it.
Yes,
Embrace it.
yes,
Let's go.
yeah, yeah. When I deliver in our program the fact that big data is the way in which to handle big data is by developing a disruptor mindset. You've got to be able to think in terms that are not the usual standard safe
Yeah.
approach to things. That's for Canadians, that is so difficult. It really is. But all right, so we got to
Winnipeg.
Edmonton.
Yeah. Edmonton. Yeah. Okay.
We got to, well, okay. I mean, you did pass through Saskatoon, did you not?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
I don't know where the rail station is in Saskatoon. Is it near
It was
the
at
best?
dark at night. So
Oh, okay. Some
I
would say
woke
it's the
I
only
woke
way to
up on
be.
the other side of Saskatoon.
Okay. Some would say it's the only way to go to Saskatoon, but I disagree. I like Saskatoon.
So do I. I've been there on road,
Yeah, yeah,
driving up north to
yeah.
paddle in northern Saskatchewan.
Yes, I know you do things like that, like
Yes, love it.
Prince Albert and L'Orange and places like that.
Oh, an hour and a half north of La Ronge.
Don't. Let's move on.
Yeah,
But then from Saskatchewan, you got into Alberta. You didn't go to the south. You went to the north because that's the
yeah,
northern route.
yeah.
Edmonton, Jasper, and then into BC.
Yeah.
Uh, what did you stop anywhere in BC other than get to Vancouver or?
Yeah, there's a couple of places that they stop throughout there, Kamloops, Abbotsford, and a whole bunch of smaller little towns
Okay.
along the route. Towns that I'd never heard of that I had to check on Google Maps when the internet was working to see what is this place and why is it here on the side of the Fraser River, right? Like seriously, like
Oh
you
no.
you look at the beautiful landscape and you're like, yeah, I get why I would want to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
But there also has to be an economic
An
model, an
economic
economic
reason to be
reason for
here.
me
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is it like? The mountains are straight up. There's no forestry here,
No,
right?
no.
Um, there's some fish in here, but they all
No,
don't look like fishermen, and I don't see any
no,
boats.
no,
So you start to
no.
think about that. But really, what captures BC is the majesty of the mountains.
Yes.
How, and we got to go just at the dark of night by Mount Robson, which
Oh,
is Canada's highest peak.
yeah, yeah,
Just barely could see it through as it got to dark of night, but it's just the majesty and the work
yeah.
that had to go in putting the railroad in where it is
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and the rural parts of the country that you see and just you look up at the mountains and
Mm,
then down at the raging river
yes.
and
Been
just the
there,
two of
done
them
that.
working in concert with
Oh,
each
yeah,
other is like
yeah,
it
yeah,
it's phenomenal
yeah,
that somebody thought this would be a good idea
yeah.
and this would be because now we'll do satellites. We'll send out drones, and you got to remember all of this was mapped by hand and by foot and by horseback.
Yes.
There were no bridges, there were no trails, there were no roads.
Oh, mhm.
The First Nations were all there,
Yeah.
and the Europeans mapped it.
Yep.
And they had to map it by hand with old school cartography technology.
That's right.
It is just phenomenal how somebody would say, well, I'm going to walk down every single one of these valleys to see which one leads where.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just that exploratory, adventurous nature
Yep.
that got us from coast to coast to coast.
Yes.
I think still is part of the Canadian identity and culture.
I
We're
agree.
just celebrating it less,
Yes. I
right? We
agree.
have
Yeah.
that exploratory nature, that adventurous nature
Yes. Yes.
of
Yes.
Canadians, and that's been built. I mean, the voyageurs, the fur traders. I mean,
Yes.
we can go on and on about our
Yeah. Yeah.
history
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
being adventurous explorers,
Yeah.
and we don't celebrate that much anymore because we've
No.
gone, sorry, but we've gone far too urban,
Yes. Yes.
far
You
too
know,
urban centric in our ideas and our
yeah, yeah.
politics and our
Well,
discussions.
urban centric, but also driven by what is, the universal problem, I think, around the world nowadays, even in places like China, which is we're also automobile oriented
Yep.
because that is the convenience to get us from point A to
Yep.
point B, and I can do it on my own. And you go, yeah, try crossing the country by automobile. Two of my nephews did that because one of my nephews was studying psychology at the University of Northern British Columbia. But he's a clinician, and so his brother-in-law went by car to meet him, pick him
Mhm.
up, and they drove back across the country.
Yeah.
And as they said, they chose the wrong season. At the same time, it was an adventure. They also said, would they do it again? No. I said, you got to do it in a different way.
Yeah. And the train is brilliant because one of the things is that you understand how little of this country is actually connected to the internet.
Yes.
There were long periods of time when there was no cell signal,
Yeah.
and the train has no Wi-Fi. Contrary to all of the trains that run in the corridor between Quebec City and Windsor,
Yeah. All of
they're
them.
all
Yeah.
Wi-Fi
Yeah.
equipped,
Yeah. I know.
right? High-speed Wi-Fi. It actually works really, really well.
Yeah. I know.
The Wi-Fi password on day one on the train was no Wi-Fi. The password on Wi-Fi password on the second day was still no Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and then you lost for hours and hours at a time. You lost access to the internet and the cell signal.
Yeah.
And it was just, you realized we've got a patchwork of civilizations in the midst of a very large open space.
Mhm.
And there are portions of this country you can go to where you can't check, you can't watch Netflix, you can't get a text message, you can't get a cell phone call. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
And we were in some small communities where you're looking at your phone going, there's
No
nothing here.
bandwidth. There's nothing here.
There's
Yeah.
nothing here.
Well, there is, but not on your phone.
Well, exactly. But on my phone, I'm in a town that has a
Yeah.
town center and streets, and
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
there's
They even
there's no
have
Wi-Fi.
lights. They even have lights and they have electricity,
Oh, I know.
but
But
they
you know
don't
what?
have cell
But you know what
connection.
everybody has? Probably a home phone on a landline from Bell,
Oh, I hope so.
right? But I mean, like they and they're not broken and they're not crying out for
No,
help and they're
no,
doing just
no,
fine without the
no,
internet.
exactly. They're thriving actually, economically,
Oh
socially,
yeah.
so on and so forth.
Yep.
It gets us into, as we bring this to some closure. When we talk about social capital, and yes, I have been trying to sit down and go through the group out of the world group based anywhere. And talking about social capital and talking about it from a theoretical and academic point of view and a research point of view, very interesting, very interesting. But what I'm going to make maybe a presumption or an assumption here that what you experience crossing the country is a community-based form of social capital.
Yep.
Right? And for you, you and your wife went, and everybody else on the train probably went as observers. But what you saw were people living in communities with an economic reality based on the community.
Yeah.
And their social capital at its richest.
Oh yeah. Because they're together. They're
They're
in it
together.
together.
Yeah.
Like they don't, you're sitting in the city of Toronto. You're worried about your own financial independence and your ability to take care of you and your family. You're not spending time considering about the city of Toronto's economic engine.
No.
When you are in a small town in rural Canada,
Yes.
you are more concerned about the community's economic engine
Yes.
than you are, because everybody in the town is tied to it.
That's right.
And so it's a community effort.
Yep.
And the prime example of that is there in northern Saskatchewan, there's one fly-in fishing lodge, and it's huge. They don't lock the doors because anybody in the local community would tar and feather anybody that dared break in and rob the place.
Yep.
Because everybody in 100 kilometers an hour,
Yeah.
100-kilometer distance
That's right.
relied on that place for
That's
their
right.
economic
That's right.
livelihood.
That's right. That's right.
So the owners of a multi-million-dollar lodge could
Yeah.
keep all the doors wide open
That's right.
and
That's right.
nothing ever disappeared
No. No.
because everybody relied on that. And the
Yeah.
same thing in small town.
Yeah.
Everybody relies on the grain, the industry, whatever it is. People aren't breaking in and stealing crap, at least not from the economic engine.
No. Well, what's interesting is, and as you're talking, I'm thinking of the contrast between the social capital that grows up in an area. The seeds are planted, whatever generation back, and it grows up and it's a community-based, a social, communitarian, economic system, if you will, if you want to use the word system, where preparedness, we go back to our ongoing theme, where preparedness is a given.
Yep.
It's not something you have to think about and plan for. It's already built into the reality of the community.
Yep.
But in contrast, you think of other types of communities that have been planted into a region from outside, right?
Yep.
And so you and I know that at least one of these is quite infamous, and that is Fort McMurray. Fort McMurray has, in developing it as a community, is not really a community. The people who lived around and still live around where Fort McMurray is are not part of the Fort McMurray industrial-based community. The economics has nothing to do with the community that grew up there.
Mhm.
The economics is there, and the community of Fort McMurray was planted there from outside. Having
Mhm.
said that, that leads us to the social capital contrast. What is the commitment of the people who work in and live in Fort McMurray as employees of what's going on in and around Fort McMurray? What's their commitment to the community and it's the social capital of the community? None. I'm here to work.
That's
I'm
a
an
tough relationship.
employee.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to get enough money that then I could leave and go buy a house somewhere in another
Or
part
go
of.
back to my family in Newfoundland.
Exactly. All right. And so it's the transplant versus the, nurtured community. And it's fascinating when we think of the contrasts and how vast that chasm is between one and the other.
Mhm.
You know, even in the planning of something like Fort Mac, there was no planning around the what if scenario. We're here to do the what needs to be done, not the what if that could happen. So we have one road that is both the in and out. And you go, okay. In retrospect, it was obviously a problem.
Oh
Created
yeah, it has turned into a problem once or twice.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, more
absolutely.
than once.
Yeah.
But at the same time, has it been remedied or rectified? The answer is no.
Yep.
Why? Because the conclave, if you will, or the community is not a community. It's a factory, much like a factory. It's an
Yep.
economic item that
Yep.
is there only for the economic reason. It has no other reason to be there. Full stop.
Yep.
But you go into, Selkirk, right, in Manitoba, or you go into, Steinbeck in Manitoba, or you go into this, you pass by this one house on the hill in a very flat area. You go into the lodge in northern Saskatchewan, and so on and so forth. Those are not economic based communities. The economy is based on the community values.
Yep.
So which comes first? The money, or the value system?
Yeah. And can they be merged, or they always have to be in a state of conflict?
Well, I think it depends on what the point of origin is. Okay, so the Mennonites settled in a godforsaken place in the middle of Manitoba, which is so freaking flat that you just go, what? I have
Why?
driven, I have been driven down from Winnipeg to the CSB Shiloh, is it?
CFB Shiloh. Yeah.
CFB Shiloh outside of Brandon.
Yep.
And I had this very young corporal come and meet me at the airport and drive me down there because I was teaching on the base for many years ago. And I had not experienced flat Canada up until that point. I've been to Saskatchewan so often, and Saskatoon and so on and so forth, that I'm quite familiar with flat. And I kept saying, where are we? How far is this? Oh, not to worry, sir. We'll be there, sir. And I kept saying, I don't think there's a horizon here. I think it just keeps going.
You can watch your dog run away for 3 days.
Yeah, and he laughed. The young corporal was just a hoot. He just laughed. He said, "No, no, no, sir. We have hills." I said, "Really?" I said, "That's nice. I'm happy for you."
Yeah.
But what I would love to do if I had a position to do it and I had the wherewithal to do it would be to take every person, particularly in high school level, out of an urban context, put them on. Got to be careful about putting them all in one place on a train. That in itself, they're adolescents. That's a weird experience. But expose them to parts of Canada that they would not be in because they would never leave the
Right.
urban experience.
Right. So you got to put them on an intentional trip.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
think a lot of people would be beneficial for that.
yeah, yeah, I agree. And my background is I'm as urban as you could possibly get. I grew up in one of the largest cities in the universe. All right, as far as I'm concerned, if I don't have lungs that are black because of pollution in the air, then if my lungs turn pink, I think I'm close to death. I
Yep.
mean, I need to have asphalt all around me and concrete and stuff like that. Otherwise, I feel lost. But you get on a train or a plane and you fly over the Rockies and you look down and you go, holy shizzy,
Yeah.
that can't be for real. And then you realize it is.
And it's a whole different perspective when you fly over them and then when you
Oh,
drive into them, whether by
oh,
car or by rail. You
oh,
don't, it's really hard to understand how big they are
yeah,
from a plane.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And almost my last story here. I spent some time in Banff with my close friends here in Toronto, Rick and Pat. Pat's Pat grew up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and Rick came from Toledo, Ohio. They met in university, married, they stayed here. And that's the 5 children that I know and consider my family. And Pat's mom and dad were travelers because dad was a surgeon. Uh, and he was actually quite famous as a burns specialist. And he got that out of the Second World War because he was in the Navy, and his ship was hit in the Pacific, and he survived it, but many people were burned because it was the ship.
Ships burn. Yep.
Yeah, they burned.
Yep.
And so he was a doctor at the time, young doctor and an officer. And that's when he realized that the criticality of someone being burned that badly
Yep.
is something but he was quite famous, and they were fairly Jerry and John were travelers. They travel around the world because that's what they love to do. That's how they spent their money. And one of their bucket list destinations was Banff.
I love Banff.
Yeah, but John died, and Jerry didn't get a chance. So what I did, I was teaching in Calgary, and I said to Rick and Pat and to Jerry, and she was in her 70s. I said to Jerry, I'm going to use points, and I'm going to fly you to come to Toronto. And then I'm going to fly the 3 of you to come out to Calgary.
Yeah.
And then we're going to rent a car, and then we're going to drive up to Banff.
Yeah.
Which is what we did. And it was one of those, it was September and it snowed, and it was just one of those, how could you not fall in love?
Exactly. It's absolutely magical.
But one of the things that Pat said, these are urban people, they had never been out west. They had never been to Alberta. And so we go to, Alice, what is it, Alice Falls or whatever, one of the falls. We're at Peyto Lake, which is one of my favorite lakes. And Pat looked up and he said, now I know why they're called the Rockies. And I looked at it and said, that's rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not, that's like, it goes straight up and
Yeah.
it's rock.
It's all rock.
It's all rock. And I said, yeah. Oh, you are neophytes. You really didn't know that it was called the
What did you
Rockies.
think they were made of?
But yeah, why do you think it was called the Rockies? Give me a
Yeah.
break. And that's the story.
Yeah.
It's they are unbelievable.
Yeah.
You can't even fathom, you can't guess, you have to be there. Yeah. So this has been a fascinating discussion, and I thank you for taking us on the trip across Canada.
My pleasure. It was worth it.
Well, not only was it worth it, but it's something I think we Canadians need to think about more frequently, and that is just not as in an ego way, not to say, "Oh, aren't we great?" Put the ego where it belongs in your back pocket and sit on it. It's really about how incredibly marvelous this country is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're a phenomenon that we don't even understand, and maybe we shouldn't, but we should experience it.
Yes. When take the chance, just take it.
Yeah. Well done. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.